My clock correct, I think.
So at the last work session meeting, city council indicated that you'd like to take a work session before two city council meetings to kind of review the MAV property option and the renovation at 8140 option. So I have put together information about the MAV property for this meeting. There's a ton of information in here, I know, a good 200 pages worth. But there's a lot in here related to the site, the process that city council went through to purchase the property, design schematics, renderings from Partners in Architecture, and I didn't necessarily want to direct city council in one way or another on how you want to have your conversation. But David Gasson from Partners in Architecture is on Zoom, it looks like.
Welcome, David. Do we want to make sure there's a non-arranged participation? Assuming that Lauren is with David, right?
I believe Lauren is with you. It's
Oh, right there.
yeah, her name is Lauren. She also works for Partners Architecture. I think it's *6 to unmute. David, if you're on your phone.
Hello, good evening.
David, Lauren, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Thank you. TV turned down again?
David, can you hear us?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
We can,
can.
thank you. Yes, thank you for testing that one more time. Appreciate it. Thanks for
So,
joining us.
Sure. So is there any particular spot where a member of the city council would like to start in conversation?
Oh,
Nope. Wave to that.
oh, he's waving his hand. Okay. Sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. That was
I did too. I went down the same track.
I don't think it would hurt to hear from somebody who was involved at this time, just to give a 5-minute version of how we arrived at this, if there is a 5-minute version of that. I guess for anybody who.
It's a lot to ask.
Well, even, I mean, just like, you know, when we hear staff report on other topics, we get generally a
I
little
do.
lowdown before we go on. So I don't know if there's something like that somebody, could be Zach, could be Paul, it could be Doug.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
I mean, to this, I mean, specific to this, so there was a design committee that solicited this design, like, you know, that sort of a thing. There's a decision made to purchase the property, and then sort of like what happens from there.
So that there was the fire station design committee that, or facilities committee that met for, I want to say, a year and a half. And at some point, that committee made a recommendation to city council, but then city council kind of took it over, and the facilities committee kind of got dropped or disbanded. There was a period of conversation at the city council table where talked about a variety of different locations, including the MAV property. Ultimately, city council directed staff to approach MAV to find out what the purchase price was, what it would take to go through the purchase process for that property. City council passed a resolution to purchase the property. Staff had put, based on that, staff put down, or was directed to put down basically an earnest deposit. We went through the property evaluation process, which I think was a fairly short period, maybe 30 or 60 days. Completed the purchase. City council passed a resolution to put a ballot proposal forward. That then was delayed, so it was, resolution was passed to put it on the ballot. A motion was made to delay it from, I think, August to November. And then COVID hit, and city council felt that it wouldn't be appropriate to put the millage ask in front of the voters while COVID was happening. Then we've had turnover in council. We reinitiated the fire station discussion process, and now we're here.
And this specific design came about once the property was purchased? Or was this design prior?
No, I think we had it before. I'm pretty sure we had.
Yeah,
I agree
a
with that.
version of it before.
I was just thinking, I think it was.
Had a strong version of it. Might have been tweaked here or there, but a strong version of it before.
And who put that together?
our partners in architecture.
Independently on their own, in collaboration with the chief, anybody from council?
So
In collaboration with all of council, the chief was involved, for sure.
I mean, yeah, I guess in terms of what I'm hoping to get out of this, I would be happy to have some version of a walkthrough of the design with call outs to particular features and how they impact the provision of services both in the city and I guess across the DAFD. Any places where anybody thinks there are decision points, further decision points to be made about the particular design. I guess just any potential for modification to the design, what the trade-offs of that would be. I guess those are the sorts of things I'm interested in learning about, whether it comes to partners in architecture or the chief. I don't care who I hear it from.
I think that will come as we work our way through. To start back and to try to do that for you, well, that's a whole nother meeting, and then we'll be back to where we started. I think we can probably work that in there. But if this discussion tonight follows this package, I think that I think you'll get it. If not, then complain. Say, whoa, 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 I'm not getting it, but that'd be my opinion.
Sounded like there wasn't necessarily a plan. Is that correct? That there was just a lot of information presented to us and you didn't want to direct the conversation. So you're looking to us for what we're looking to get out of the conversation.
Well, so towards it, David, are you prepared to take us through the design roughly? Do you have access to the packet?
I do have a PDF that I could look at, and maybe even before I do that, if you wish, I can give you an overview from my involvement perspective, and some of it certainly included Justin's overview of the things that happen more from a leadership decision-making process on your end. But our input, I would say in a nutshell, if I can make it really brief, we assess the needs of the community as a big picture in terms of what the fire services would be, and developed a program based on that assessment, which included committee work with designated representatives from council and other, and then direct involvement with firefighters and the fire chief at that time, previous to Chief Smith, and developed a program, a size, basically, what would the future fire service needs look like in terms of a building size? And we did that. And then time, as Justin mentioned, years of kind of effort and research and refinement took place. Working then with Chief Smith, revisited that program and tuned it up to what the current thinking was at that point, because it was a year plus afterwards. And did multiple, I would say in the range of double digits, tests for fit possibilities throughout the community on where stations could possibly be. And that wasn't just based on property size, but it was based with some sense of responsiveness from that geographic area to serve the city. And then the property at Mav was purchased after we went through that effort, and that was one of those tests for fits, so to speak. And used that program and refined it even more at that point, and developed the three major components of every fire station: the apparatus support stuff that happens for prevention and firefighting, and training and administrative areas, and then living, the lifestyle side, the dorms and kitchen and day room. Those three major components assembled into a plan on the site. Then from that, looking at the site, how do you access it as a public person wanting to go to your fire station, as a firefighter arriving to then go to an event, or an apparatus leaving the station? And how do you use that site to create a circulation where those things did not commingle or cause obstacles with that new building print? And that's kind of where we ended up with, I think it was in fall of 19, where we presented a plan, or two plans, actually, one that included the sheriff component and one that did not include the sheriff component. And the package looked like a site plan, a building, a floor plan, some character imaging. So we would be looking at, the streetscape of it and materials, and then a budget. How do all those things come together in a package? And that's kind of how we, I think, left it in the fall of 19 is where I'm going from memory here. But I could probably scroll through some of this PDF that I have to pinpoint more precisely some of those dates. But in essence, that's kind of the path we went down over the course of a lot of research and effort and collaboration. Hopefully that was, could you hear me when I was talking there?
Yeah, we could hear you, David. Thank you.
Okay.
The driver for this was, we had a needs assessment that said, for the needs that the DAFD has at this facility, they're gonna have this many people working there. Here's the things to support that. You need day room, you need sleeping rooms. For training purposes, you need the space for them to be in. For apparatus, you
Who
need
was
this
on
much
the needs
space.
committee?
I don't recall.
Do you remember when it was?
What's that?
Do you remember when it was?
No,
Is
this
there a
is,
report?
So
Mr. Hicks?
the original needs assessment would have been somewhere around 2014 or 15, and got updated as we went forward. Because we originally hired David to help do a structural evaluation of the existing station, and then do some work for a new site. At the time, the only new site we had was Dan Hoy. If you remember that. And so he had a green site, which was Dan Hoy at that time, although there was a house there, we tore that down. But the green site at that time was Dan Hoy. And then over the life of the facility committee during that 2-3 year period, whatever it was, or 3 years, we gravitated towards the Mav site as another option,
Right.
is what I recall.
Yeah.
And then that site quickly rose to the top. And then, as you mentioned, the test for fit is, again, making sure it could function, make sure it would fit on the site, within the appropriate size, the driveways, the access. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I
I think
recall.
that's right.
for the new folks, this wasn't the only site that we did test for fit on. We did it at the American Legion property.
Correct.
We did one at the Parish Hall, the old Parish Hall for St. Joe. We did it for the Copeland property. We did it for some industrial sites on Second Street. And probably another 2 or 3 that have been forgotten to time.
Yes.
Regarding this design, things that have sort of come up in conversation, were there key assumptions related to like the anticipated quote lifespan of the station? I think that's been talked about in the past. Do you want a 25-year station? Do you want a 50-year station? And I've also heard general questions, comments about room for expansion, that sort of a thing. Along those 2 dimensions, could you describe this station in terms of lifespan and if there would be anticipated future renovations, additions, that sort of a thing?
Yes, the general approach in life cycle is 30 years for a building. Our approach in municipal facilities, where it's owner occupied and an essential service, we look to design a building from a structural standpoint to be 50+ years. But we always anticipate and advise our owner groups like you guys that there are going to be changes in maintenance items that need to happen just because of wear and tear. But in around the year 30, you're going to want to look at, and it's just going to rise to the discussion that there are going to be things that you want to address. So the building plan from a space standpoint anticipates growth over the next 30 years. The building construction type and the budgeting that goes into a construction project looks at it from a 50-year standpoint. That's our way of doing it. And that's pretty typical, I would say, in the municipal arena of how do you plan and design and construct community assets.
And how often in your experience, I don't know how many fire stations you've helped design, how often in your experience do municipalities decide to build sort of in phases, anticipating, major additions after a shorter period of time? Or do you typically see, in your experience, it being built for that longer lifespan right away?
Typically, the beginning of a design looks at that window of time I talked about. When we look at something less than that, it's usually driven by budget constraints. Well, we see what we need to do. We all agree to that, but we can't afford, or we don't think that's where we should spend all of our capital at this point. What can we do less with a plan in place that when the need arises, we can do X, Y, and Z to fulfill the initial vision. That's a way that things are done in phases that we see. And in terms of our fire stations, I think we're probably working on 8 or so at the moment. Probably recently finished 4 or 5 in the last couple of years through this course of the pandemic and even a few years prior. So those discussions that I just described, budget constraints and issues, have come up in all of those. And sometimes that phasing approach would come up not in a building as an individual thing, but as a department. As an example, we're working with the city of Warren right now, and their needs have forecasted 5 new stations. That's a lot of stations to have happen at one time from a lot of different perspectives, just the dynamics and culture within the station or the department ranks, and then the funding of it. So that approach is a phasing approach. So we're dealing with it from a prioritization standpoint for them, which station needs to happen first, and then going through the process of getting them all done. And I think their overall range, and Lauren, if you're on the line, maybe you know more specifically on that because you're talking with them. I think there's a 3-year plan to get things underway for all of them. But that's another way to phase it, is not parts of a building, but parts of the department.
And David, you're right. They want to have everything started, if not completed, within 3 years.
Yeah.
I have one more.
And maybe another point I think that's important is a lot of stations that we and everybody else does that does fire stations as a specialty, they're not all new stations. I don't want to say the majority, but it's probably a pretty good split of we're working with an existing station that has good bones, it's in the right spot. And they can't lose functionality, let's say. So a lot of what we do is creating a new vision for the existing station and in addition to fulfill some spatial needs that they don't currently have. And that's pretty common. Things change quite a bit. And that's why flexibility, when you're looking at a station outward to 30 years, you need to have flexibility in the design to start with. So you could either minimize changes or certainly minimize additions, but you do have to account for changes because there are changes even in the last 3 years and currently pending. There's a huge change that's right on the horizon that could happen tomorrow. That you may or may not be familiar with the building code. Michigan adopts it every 3 years. The cycle of adoption right now is the 2018 code. We're way behind. Typically, they ratify that 3 years following the recommendation. So that would have been 2021. There's been a couple things that have caused them to delay it. One of them, a big one in my mind, is for essential services, police, fire, emergency operations, those sorts of building types. To require a storm shelter element within the structure itself, which is a pretty big consideration. So that would be a change. Let's say that gets ratified and now it's required. Well, there's a lot of stations out there that could potentially want to consider that. They won't be required to do it, but anything new is going to be required to deal with that. And any major renovation of 50% or more would likely be looking at that as a requirement too. So that's a change I think that is going to come about if that's approved. And I assume it will be approved. It was in the 2015 code and it went through the process of getting close to adopted and then the governor pulled it out. I don't think that's going to happen now, but because it's happened once before, the second time around it's probably going to be approved.
How large are those community? I forget what you call them.
Like a storm shelter, safe room.
How large are those?
They are specific to the building type and occupants of the building. So for the fire station, I would, I'm just going to give you a number. It's going to be around 50 people because your maximum occupancy is likely going to be when you're in full function during a day and you have a training exercise going on. So you're probably going to have 50 plus people in the building. So we would have to accommodate 50 plus people from the storm requirements. I think Dexter's in zone 3. So it has its requirements of wind resistance, et cetera. And that space that we designate as the storm shelter has to stay in the event the rest of the building gets blown away. So it's generally a building within a building, so to speak. And we've done 5 of those around the state. And probably the biggest one in the state we did was for Michigan State Police. But we've done a number of them. And we have one in process right now with the city of Port Huron, their new central fire station. We're designing one to them. The same thing for Green Oak Township. They have a 5-bay station, new central station going on that we're incorporating that, anticipating that the code is going to pass. And with the good common sense that it's a good thing to have. It's an essential building. You need to be able to operate even in dire circumstances when you're in your station. So they're going to do it even though the code's not been ratified yet.
On the topic of change design for either Mr. Gasson or the chief, would this building basic design at this site allow for addition living quarters if we switch to full-time firefighters in the future?
Well, I would say yes. Right now we have that somewhat built in. I think we have, is it 5?
There's 4 in there now.
Yeah, we have 4 now. And to whatever the direction is, looking at the station to the right, which we preserved as green space right now, there is the ability to do that addition and potentially to the direction out of the back, but more than likely to the green space. And forgive me for not knowing the east-west direction, but to the right, looking at the station.
And this apparatus bay would provide adequate space for the equipment that we have today. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And having front and rear loaded, my understanding, talking from folks better, provides greater flexibility for how equipment is staged, depending on the time of the year and demand for the station. Is that fair?
I don't want to step on David if he's going to comment, but in my opinion, yes, because the trucks can go out the front of the back, and so you don't have to move stuff around by moving one out of the way to respond to another.
Right, and one of the complications we have for our station design with respect to building it more cheaply and adding on is that because we have a hybrid department, we're going to have folks who are in the building responding for large events and folks coming from outside the building to respond to large events, which means the pathway, the scramble time is going to be different. And so that, I mean, if you look on the building,
What page on that?
I
Oh,
don't
sorry.
know.
Okay.
On the left side of the building, that's where a lot of the support equipment is proposed. That's where the jackets with off-gas decontamination would be. And correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why it's placed there is that the volunteer folks would be able to park their cars, walk 8 feet on the sidewalk, get in the door, get their turnout gear, and they're in the apparatus bay.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, go back to Donna's question about the definition and the concept. There's a lot of work by myself. Courtney was here at the time, Dave Gasson, and looking at those square footage needed and then laying it out so that it makes sense for operations. If you look at the given project right now, or plan that's put together, and this was by no means the final one, it allows for the full-time staff to respond from the administrative side of the station, getting out to the bay and getting to the trucks that need to go out first, generally, depending on the alarm. The other side of the station is where the majority of the parking spaces are for paid-on-call folks to come in. They're close to where we have gear storage and things like that. So when they come into the building, those that leave their gear in the building simply grab their gear and then take a support truck, which is on that side of the building. So it makes it a little quicker for them. By and large, the most important trucks to get out the fastest are the initial response trucks, which will all be right next to the active. I think David talked about was the storm shelter. In this building, my understanding of the code is we've talked about multiple types of buildings, a steel building, a wood building, a block building. I think to meet this requirement, my understanding of the code is that we end up going to a block building and put in, if you will, storm glass or hurricane glass, and we make the entire building a storm shelter for the fire guys that are in there. And so that block building costs a little bit more, but it meets the requirement of that code, in my understanding. David, I may have a different thought on that and what their interpretation is, but it's just kind of new code stuff.
You're correct, Chief. Those are the things that make it they're inherent to what we're trying to do using those materials. Masonry block materials, precast concrete plank ceiling elements, and basically they double as the mezzanine floor, let's say. But those sort of things are what we need to create. And there's put it like this, like a bunker. Basically, you want a place to go to be safe during the worst parts of a storm, and you may be there for a period of time. So facilities have to be part of that too. Bathroom, restroom, communications have to be part of that that space that you designate as your storm shelter. So it's likely it's in the living area because that's where your daily on-staff people are, so they get to it as quickly as they can. The other element to it, the code kind of is an evolving, changing thing, and I learn things by either talking or reading the code or interacting with officials. And when you have multiple essential services or elements of need, seniors or kids within a proximity of 1,000 feet, that classification of a storm shelter could be used, if you choose, by others than just the firefighters. And it serves that purpose no matter where they come from. But if it's a requirement and they're within 1,000 feet, it meets the requirement. Not that you don't have that immediately. It just popped in my head, so I thought I'd share that little nuance to the code that I'm really just learning because of another project that does have several essential services within a campus-like setting where it makes sense to use one storm shelter versus 3 storm shelters.
I have some question about the apparatus bay. Would this design allow a space to park an ambulance, whether it's our own or HVA?
I believe that was in the calculations as a
Okay.
possibility.
Would this apparatus bay allow firefighters to pop the hoods and check fluid levels within the
Yes.
bay?
Yes.
Okay. Would this apparatus bay allow for indoor training with ropes and ladders and other such things throughout the year?
We haven't gotten that far into the designing of it, but the concept you're describing is something we would want to have potentially as part of the apparatus bay and the mezzanine. And I don't have the images up in front of me, but I believe on one side, well, we do have those kind of rappelling and we do have the gurney training tower arrangement. I'm looking at the plan now. So there would be the tripod training with gurneys down through the stair tower, which also would have some confined training elements. I see the circle in the maintenance shop. Basically, that gives you the ability from the mezzanine to drop down through equipment, accessories, basically, to create a confined training exercise. So there are training components that are already kind of in the big picture. They're just not completely defined. But we know that those are essential for future, obviously, for training for your new team. I'm looking at the
other
images.
easy, I mean, we know we have a mezzanine and we know we have a first floor. Another apparatus bay accessible space is that you can do ladder throws from the apparatus bay onto the mezzanine. And we've done that in recent fire stations so that you can have that indoor training aspect. So having that mezzanine with that stair connecting and then a couple of those punch throughs from mezzanine down below, along with some like window openings to the interior, is a really good way to maximize that training diversity.
Yeah, and indoor exercises on the mezzanine. So when you're knocking through, have areas for that sort of training. I think you did that at the Grosse Pointe Station, Lauren, if I'm not mistaken. But the other thing you did was, I thought was really nice, the standpipe training within the apparatus bay. Not every station wants or could deal with an interior column, but that's an opportunity to run infrastructure down. And one of the things we've put on interior columns in the open area are standpipe for training on the inside of the building. And all those things, to the person asking the question, are elements of the refined programming when we get to the design development stage of the project, where we're really looking in detail at those opportunities that the building presents, in addition to what we've determined are requirements for the building.
Yeah, has anybody looked at the routes that you're going to be taking for when you move to a new site? What I'm wondering is, will there be any cost for the community in terms of our secondary streets are not gonna hold up to, loaded fire trucks. So how will you get out? And what will we need to do to upgrade streets to make it happen?
I think the only real change might be, what's the road that turns off from Ann Arbor by the museum there?
Inverness.
No,
To the north. Is that Inverness? Anyway, it
Yeah,
does.
it's Inverness.
Okay, so that would be the one that might see a little more increased traffic than normal. But everything else probably is still gonna run right down Dexter and Arbor Road for the most part. We try not to run back roads to, we don't weave in and out of neighborhoods to make responses. Try to take direct routes on main roads until we, kind of get there on better roads.
Chief, what are the first vehicles to leave the station with a fire?
Fire, it'll be engine 1 in the city, followed by tanker 2. And then you get a squad come down.
So if in our current arrangement, we have 2 firefighters in the city station, right?
Yes.
Do they both go on engine 1?
No, one will take the engine, the other will take the tank.
Okay, so they drive separate.
They drive it. So we need the assets on the ground.
So,
On medicals, it's always the squad and then an engine follow.
so I don't know, my copy's a little blurry, so I might not be reading this right, but some of these shapes is one of these is a brush truck, I believe, it's shown in this picture.
We have a Jeep that it's a much brush truck.
So what's the logic on having the brush truck in the city?
Having 2 people to take it. If we have a wildland fire, they're gonna take tanker 2 in the brush truck. They're not gonna take the engine. Sorry, I think the wildfire there. So they'll take the brush truck and they'll take the squad out of here. And they'll be met with 2 other squads from the other 2 stations that are also set up as brush trucks. You can't take engines and tankers out into the fields and factories, so we gotta have a Jeep.
And then there's a triangular shaped, which I assume is a trailer. Is that a boat?
Boat's not scheduled to be there. It might be the fire prevention trailer
Or the gator trailer,
or the what?
or a gator
There's
trailer.
there's a gator trailer.
No,
I'm pretty sure it was the gator trailer.
Is it the gator trailer, Dave?
And that's, I think that's what we programmed initially. Maybe it's fallen off the list since we did this, but that is my recollection.
No, we still have. it.
Okay.
Would this apparatus may allow greater flexibility with the purchase of engines and tankers,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and would allow greater flexibility for us to get loaners, for example, when 2 of them are down for repairs?
That's a possibility, but loaner fire apparatus, there aren't a lot of them out there that be loaned out, but it is a possibility.
And would this apparatus may allow greater opportunities to, one of the things I've seen a couple of departments do is they'll put longer bumpers on with the jaws of life up in the front.
Certainly,
Stuff like that.
designing our trucks would change dramatically. We would be able to get longer trucks, longer apparatus. We're struggling right now with, the size of the apparatus is getting bigger because of the pumps, the engines, the tools, everything you gotta carry. Here in Dexter, we can't go longer, so we have to go higher. We can't go higher because of the viaduct. And so we are very, very limited in what we can do with our apparatus because of those 2 issues. If I could develop a truck that's maybe 3 or 4 foot longer than what we can today, I wouldn't even worry about the viaduct so much because I'd be able to build a lower profile truck.
How often do we actually acquire new trucks or sell old trucks, or how often does that change take place, just roughly?
No, NFPA recommendation is turning trucks over every 15 years,
Okay,
no matter how many miles are on them or how much maintenance. Station departments that don't run can kind of stretch that out a little bit, but you want to be careful that if you do try to stretch it out and something goes wrong with the truck and you lose a life because your truck fails, we don't replace stuff when it wears out. We have to replace it before it wears out. The last thing we want is to not have it operate someday when we need it. So the general recommendation is every 15 years.
And we have one that's past that and one that's approaching that.
For the two tankers are our biggest problem right now. One was due to be replaced under the recommendation in 2016. The other one was due this year. But we also took a 40-year-old aerial out of service when I first got here, just because it was 40 years old and it wasn't passing inspections and maintained very well. And so we need to look at replacing that at some point down the road. But our primary need right now is tankers. The squads that we run are all, the oldest one is 5 years, 4 years, excuse me. So we turned them over. The squads you can run as long as you replace them when you need to type thing. We had 2 old engines that we replaced. So engines 1 and engine 3 are 2 years old. We replaced them at the same time. So you've got a number of years to go on that. Engine 2 that sits out at Dexter Township, I believe is 2012. So, you know, it's starting to get there. Another 4 or 5 years, we'll have to look at what we want to do with that.
Thanks. I have a question for David about back when he was talking about building or designing for 50 years on the structural side and 30 years of growth. David, can you talk to us about what you were considering the growth over 30 years when you were designing this?
I missed the very tail end of that. Could you?
Just what type of growth were you anticipating with this design over the next 30 years?
I'm not sure the factor that we used, but it was through the kind of discussion process in the program. It might have been considering calls. It might have been considering just growth of the community.
So David, I can take a little bit of that if you want. In putting this plan together and making recommendations for the municipality, I can look at the long-term potential. So there's 2 ways that municipal fire departments grow. They either add people or they add missions, which means more equipment. Okay. When I look at Dexter City or Dexter Area Fire Department, and I look at the future, I don't see that you're going to acquire any new missions than what you're doing today. You're not going to add hazmat. It's already done at the county. You're not going to add swift water. It's done at the county level. So you're just not going to see an increase over the next 40 to 50 years of equipment. And so I think this 5-bay building will suffice for what you need for that time period. The other way you grow is by adding people. And you know that's costly, and not every community can afford to do that. But we did, while we got 2 people on duty today, 40 years from now, I could see you having 4 people on duty at this station and 2 at each of the outlying. But again, everybody you add adds about $100,000. Every single body adds about $100,000 to the budget. So will the municipality be able to tolerate that kind of addition down the road? I can only guess at this point that for the life of this building, you might get to 4 people. The growth piece, another growth piece is if you get to that and you go over, you could bunk up. We don't like to do it. We don't like to put 2 people in a bunk room, but at that point in time, you know, you're 40 years down the road, hopefully you're looking at what to do to the next station, right? But if you had to have bunk beds in the stations, then at that time you can take a reasonable idea of whether you want to do that. So, but I think you're set up with 4 bunk rooms in the 5 bays. I think you're set up and you're not going to outgrow that over 40 years. And that's my opinion. That's my opinion. There's very little data that's good you're going to find that says, yep, this is what's going to happen.
In the packet on page 146, this comes from a partner in architecture presentation back in 2019. There's a table of fire stations across the state, their title, their location, whether it was new or renovation, value, square footage. I'm just curious how that table was compiled. Was it intended to be sort of a random sample, a recent sample, comparables? Yeah, yeah, that first question, thanks.
So the purpose, well, how was it assembled? There are obviously not all of the stations we've worked on, but there's public information that we try to gather just to keep in our budgeting data, how the trend of costs are going up over the years. It's not something you can use from, and it's more of a big picture thing is basically what it is. To get a sense of where things are and how they've gotten there from a ticking up of cost. And that online search or talking with municipalities or talking with contractors or other architects is how we've assembled that. And we've recently updated it as well because of the dynamics, the huge swings that have occurred in the last couple of years. We wanted to see what the effect of that is, and it's pretty staggering actually, what the effect of cost has been recently.
Were all these stations built? Do we know, or are these just estimates?
I don't have that list in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that those were built or at the very least publicly bid projects. I don't think they were just, unless it was something I put in there that we were working on at the time as an estimate. I think all of that was really, it's meant to be, here's real examples of what happened out in the marketplace. Not to say there might be one or two in there that we were either currently working on that and used an estimate from.
It also kind of helped us. Knowledge per square foot.
Yeah, David, that list has a column of bid results.
Okay. Do you have that in front of you, Lauren, by any chance?
Yeah, the one in the agenda package. Yes.
Yeah.
It has bid results in, Canton Fire Station number 2. That was bid out and built.
Yeah.
Charlotte was one that was bid out. Portage Fire Station was bid out. And then the Grosse Point was built. So
Okay.
that's the public safety.
Okay. So it does kind of corroborates what I was saying. They were either bid at the very least, but mostly built.
Mhm.
My recollection is we're trying to double check some of the square footage estimates too. I think back 20,000 square foot. And what the estimate was that he had. Comparable to, this, you can see that the range of the 2018-19. There's one outlier there is Farmington Hills Fire Station 3 and community center came in at a little over $200 square foot. Most of them are upwards of 300 or above.
Yeah. Yeah, and those costs aren't, they're somewhat in a vacuum, right? The construction type, land cost, or not land costs, but site development costs are a big factor in what the overall cost of a project is, and it's kind of not irrelative to a square foot. It's really not a part of the building. And then, we've done some stations that have been incredibly, surprising in cost. And I'm not sure if Rochester's on there, but that's a crazy number. And there might be others that I'm not familiar with that have some circumstances that the numbers are either low or high. But I think there's probably an easy thing to draw as a average or trend. A trend is more likely what you're looking at. And right now it's in the 425 to 475 range. And that's a tick up from where I'm sure that list is. I don't know. That was in 2019, I think we prepared that list. Is that right,
Yes,
Lauren?
correct. Yep.
Is that?
Page
And
146.
what were the
agenda package,
numbers? And what were the numbers on, the average in that year of 19?
In
In
was
the
about
high threes or
3.
four?
Yeah, between 3s and 4s. Well, Canton was high. We knew that. There was a few design elements that they wanted, including site costs that David was mentioning. Grosse Point that was a pretty good number for the build. That was a multi-story building that added some circulation costs for vertical, including an elevator. And So, but overall, they're in about the 320 to, 350 range would be the average.
So even though that's been a relatively short period of time since that list was prepared, looking at a median price, you're going to be in the $450 or $100 more per square foot today than that time frame back in 2019, which is, like I said, it's pretty staggering to see prices go up. The footnote to that is when a project's bid, there's a huge swing from the low bid to the high bid on the same exact project at the same exact time. And that swing that we are kind of used to is, 15, 20% in normal circumstances. But in years recent, it's been more in the 35%, even higher. So the range, same building, same day, is more volatile. I mean, there's always going to be a really tight knit group somewhere where the price is the right price. At least we think so. But there's a wild swing. It's just indicative of the construction climate. And we keep thinking it's getting to be more normal, but we keep getting surprised also.
What are the benefits of having a single story station versus a multi-story station?
The benefits of a single story, the benefits are not having to go up and down stairs or have to have an elevator. So there's a cost impact and there's a efficiency of getting where you need to be from a time standpoint. The benefit would be is if you have a very small site, your best option is possibly going up if that's the site you have to work with. The chief may have some other operational thoughts on why one is better or what are the pros and cons of each.
But I think you hit it right. It's really about the size of the space that you have to work with. But a two-story station, the real bad part, or the down part is you got twice as many hallways, you got many more restrooms because you have to have on a floor, you have to have an elevator that you're going to maintain and certify every year. There's just a lot more maintenance costs and cost per square footage when you start looking at a second story building.
Your productive square footage is a lower percentage of the overall building. So you have to have
If you're
two.
going to combine like a city hall or something and put that on the second floor, it probably makes sense. But it doesn't make sense to do it as just a fire station if you've got the land to put it on.
Yeah, it increases
Can't do fire poles anymore.
increases your circulation. Yeah, ideally, a fire station somewhere around, let's say, 5,000 square foot increments needs about a half acre roughly in a station. Like we usually say, you need about 2 acres for a station like this, somewhere in the 18 to 20,000 square foot. That's kind of a normal and not normal, but it's appropriate, let's say. Sometimes it's not that, and you have to deal with the site that you have. But if you get to choose, you want to be somewhere in that range of roughly 5,000 square feet equals a half acre. In general, we've done that. That Grosse Pointe fire station was almost 20,000 square feet, and it was on a half acre, and it had a pull-through station, which was, that was a driving design issue, was how do you fit the thing on the site? Some of the other things about circulation, like the chief said, and as you can imagine, multiple floors has multiple routes of circulation, which adds square feet, which adds cost. So if you, going back to the word, I think is right, is appropriate. The appropriate site helps you design a building that's going to function the best that it can, optimally for the use. And here you want it to be clear, easy, and as fast as possible to get from point A to point B.
Does everybody feel like they have a good understanding of the layout of all the rooms, colors? You would ask a question about design elements. Process. Any questions you have relative to that?
I don't think so.
Chief, where is the decontamination room on this?
I don't have it in front of me. It's probably on
It's on the
far side.
support side.
Okay, it's one of those rooms over there.
Yes,
Is that where the room to fill the breathing apparatuses is also?
it could be on that side, but it would be a sealed room or a cutoff room from everything else.
Yeah, right now we have the decon as you would return from an event. It's in the back of the building. So you do some decon outside before you enter the building, which you directly enter into decon. And if you're looking from the street to the building, it's in the rear to the left. So it's on the support side of the bay, but it's as far as away from the PPE area as possible, just from contamination, even though they're room separated, it's just by distance the farthest away also.
I think I
Maybe that answers your question there, Mayor.
Okay, so they're over there on the left side, left corner. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So David, if you were gonna update this cost to 2022, you're saying roughly 450 to 475 a square foot? Have I heard-
And that's in very general terms. Yes, I say that including that pretty big variable of site development cost. Some of your site development is kind of in place. You have curb cuts. You also have some detention there. There's some things about your site that I think is going to lessen the burden a little bit, but yes, we would update this cost. And if you're anticipating something, that's probably what you should anticipate. And we break it down more than just it's this many feet times this many dollars. Each space, you know, the apparatus bay, the support, the living side, the office administration side, training areas, et cetera, all have different unit costs per square foot of that type of building. So it's more of a spreadsheet equation versus a single math problem that we do. Even though we make it look simple, we try to put all the detail into it so it is representative of the real best cost that we can say it is.
But you would expect the average to come out within that range somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly what but we would do the footwork to make sure.
David, if I may, are you seeing a cost difference? We talked about the essential building, and we talked before previously with this being a prefab steel building or something to that nature. Are we actually seeing a cost benefit by going to the concrete and meeting the code requirement we talked about versus trying to stay with steel that's gone sky high?
We do a cost benefit analysis on both of those because it changes so quickly, or it has recently changed so quickly from a design decision to a bid time. We really try to look at both, and we have developed somewhat of a combination, but you're right on there. The essential part of that storm shelter has got to be the right kind of materials. So you can't really alter that too much. There's the possibility of looking at different building construction types on other parts of the building, like the support side. It's rather easy to think of options there that are going to impact or reduce costs, similar to the bay, even though there's not a lot of options to it, but there are different ways to do the bay. And then the living side, there's a little bit of flexibility in that in terms of construction type. And we look at those alternates, and sometimes we bid them as alternates. And the easy thing to do was back in the summer of 19, we were looking, because steel was kind of bonkers, right? So we were doing some limited metal frame construction where things were. And on a given day, steel might have been cheaper than wood. On other days, wood was more costly than steel. Kind of crazy, but that's the way it was. So we look at alternates, not just in the design process to make a decision, but we look at alternates right up to bidding. So we get the real number on bid day. It's this much for that route, or it's this much for the other route. And we think that's prudent to do that. It's a little more work, but in the end, I think you end up with a better product at the right price.
What questions? What are we not talking about that we should be?
All right.
Well,
We'll
maybe-
get to those.
Yeah, I guess
But
I could see, doing this sort of thing again for the other design, and then maybe a third one where we're trying to bring that all together, looking at the guiding principles, looking at our opportunity statement, any other sort of summary to talk about.
Questions related to sheriff part of this? Pretty self-explanatory, enough.
Would be nice if the future packet, if there could be table of contents, I don't know how much of a pain that would be to do, just there was a lot in that packet, and so there was just something up front that told us what was in it as it starts. And maybe not a bad idea, I mean, I pulled out for myself just our latest, the guiding principle statements and the opportunity statement, maybe those are some of the front messages. Reminding us of those things.
And I think all of this, if not most of it, are also included in the fire facility binders that were distributed.
Yeah.
Okay, we all through this work session then? David, Lauren, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hope you have a great evening.
Have a good one.
Our pleasure to be with you.
Chief, thank you. Anybody need a break or do you want to jump right in the meeting? Okay, let's take 3 minutes and